How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another Pioneer tier list video. We're going to go over the top decks in Pioneer and see how the rest of the metagame shakes out as we move towards the second season of RCQs upcoming in the next weeks. Before we dive into that, be sure to check out my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/darthjacen. I stream 5 days a week, tons of Magic Online gameplay, so if you're curious about the various decks of the format, be sure to check it out. As always, be sure to check the description down below to see all of the FNM Tier decks. A lot of popular decks sometimes oscillate between the FNM Tier and D Tier. Anything below D Tier will be in the description down below. So let's dive right in with the D Tier. These are the decks that I would recommend staying away from. They tend to have a bad matchup into enough the format, or they aren't able to put up consistent enough success to be worth playing in your RCQs or in your bigger events. First up, we have Lotus Field. This deck's been putting up some small amount of results over the last couple weeks, mainly due to its matchup into Rakdos Midrange, but with the printing of Shieldred and Liliana, it's become tougher for Lotus to exploit Red Black Midrange as much as it used to, and the prevalence of mono-white humans and the Spirits decks is keeping Lotus Field from moving up any higher. Next up, we have Boris Heroic. This is a deck that beats up on mono-green something fierce, but has a difficult time dealing with Red Black Midrange, especially with the printing of Liliana of the Veil. Next up, we have Rakdos Sacrifice. This is a deck that kind of moves in and out of the C and D tier, though it does have a favorable matchup into Rakdos Midrange. It struggles into mono green Devotion, and lots of decks are able to exploit its slow starting pace, as it takes a little while for your engines to get online. Next up, we have Blue-Red Creativity. This is the version that uses Xenagos, God of Revels, and Worldspine Worm as a one-turn kill. We've seen this deck be able to attack both Red Black Midrange and sometimes mono green, though it does still struggle into some of the Karn builds, especially those with Ratchet Bomb in the sideboard. This is a deck that is good into a lot of the linear decks, but struggles when you play against decks with a heavy amount of counter spells. Next up, we have Jund Sacrifice. This is the version that is playing Korvold in addition to the Rakdos Sacrifice package. It sits similarly where even though you have Korvold as a big threat to get over the top, it doesn't make you all that much faster. It just gives you a better way to kill. Next up, we have Nivtalite. This is a deck that managed to win one of the challenges this weekend with Claudio bringing the deck back from the dead. It manages to have a good Rakdos midrange matchup, especially as you're able to go over the top, but you are still going to struggle with many of the aggro decks, even with the addition of Leyline Binding. Last up, we have 5-color Enigmatic, which, similar to Niv, picked up Leyline Binding as an addition from Dominaria United, but still struggles with getting its engine online before other decks go underneath it, and continues to see struggles against mono green Devotion, as their combo can kill you even after you've established your engine. Next up, we're going to jump right to the top. It is, in my opinion, the best way to look at the format is to look at some of the decks that build the foundation, and then you have the decks that sort of fill out the top echelons that everyone is targeting. Normally, I would say these decks are S tier. They are the best decks and you should be playing them, especially if your goal is to win the tournament. But over the last couple weeks since Dominaria United has come out, we've seen a amassment of finishes for these two decks. So I would say they have moved up to an S plus tier, though it'll still be represented as S tier on the tier list. These are decks that are now starting to show a dominance of the format that may require some form of intervention if other decks can't figure out a way to consistently beat them. First up is Rakdos Midrange, which in the context of the last few weeks has been putting up monstrous results, including this weekend putting up 18 qualifying finishes for a data set, 15 of which came from the two challenges. That is a massive percentage of the decks tied for top 16 that were Rakdos Midrange, including a huge showing on Sunday, including winning the challenge. If nothing changes, Rakdos Midrange is looking like a dominating factor that is easily the best deck in format. Next up, we have Mono Green Devotion. This deck has been outpacing the field alongside Red Black Midrange, though falling a little bit shy of midrange, but the deck is able to handle most of the other decks and continually puts up more finishes than any other deck. Since Dominaria United has come out, it has more than 13 more qualified finishes than the third place deck, and the deck continues to show up in great finishes in the challenges, including a 2nd and 5th place finish in Saturday's challenge. While of the two S plus decks, Mono Green is definitely the one that people have figured out how to challenge more. The deck's ability to beat up on Rakdos Midrange and other top decks in the format keep it aloft above most of the rest of the format. Next up, we're going to move to the A tier. These are decks that are solid contenders, though again, with the presence of S plus decks, I would not recommend them. However, this deck does have a good ability in the hands of top pilots to put up good finishes, including a 8th place and a 3rd place finish this weekend, and that is blue-white control. The power level of this deck is quite high, though you do have to leverage early Teferis and Wandering Emperors to finish the game while backing everything up with a glut of counterspells. You're able to attack Mono Green Devotion reasonably, although you are unfavored, and I think the best situation against Rakdos Midrange is to stall them long enough that you can get to your late game without them resolving a Liliana of the Veil. However, blue-white control's big advantage is that it's able to beat up most of the other decks in the format, so even if you do struggle a non-zero amount of time against the best decks, you are very good into the rest. Next up, we have the B tier. These are the decks that have generally one good matchup of the top matchups in the format and tend to be waiting for some shakeup to either move up or get put down a few pegs. Both these decks are more linear aggro decks and generally are trying to pick off Mono Green Devotion while struggling against Red Black Midrange, keeping them from moving up to A tier. First up, we have Mono White Humans. This is a deck that has been picking up more and more attention of late, mainly due to Wedding Announcement and Extraction Specialist giving you some better tools against Rakdos, while cards like Deckenstone and the various low to the ground creatures backed up by Brave the Elements gives you a great way to attack Mono Green. Next up, we have Bant Spirits, which has been consistently putting up the better finishes among the Spirits decks. We've long since known that Spirits has a great Devotion matchup, but adding in the extra colors for Extraction Specialist and Collected Company give you much better game against Rakdos than the mono blue version that was previously the de facto best Spirit deck. Now we move on to C tier, and these are the decks that sort of bridge the gap between the D tier decks that I wouldn't really recommend even for your local events with any level of serious competition, and the B tier, which are more where I would expect decks to be falling in the top 8, top 16. These C tier decks might have a spike finish of putting up 1 or 2 toppies into top 8, but on the whole, they tend to either be newer to the list or have some problematic matchups in the metagame. First up, we have Mono Blue Spirits, which, as we talked about, has a great matchup into Mono Green, but does struggle with Rakdos Midrange, and at being the worst of the two major Spirits decks, does tend to put it down a tier from Bant right now. Next up, we have Abzan Griesfang, a deck that does a great job of getting under decks that aren't able to interact, including Rakdos Midrange due to their inability to kill a 3 toughness creature on turn 3 very reliably, but the rise of Leyline of the Void and other ways to favorably interact with a lot of decks playing cheap interaction make it so Abzan Griesfang has trouble closing out post-board games. Even though it did put up 2 top 8 finishes this weekend, it is still in a position where I would not recommend taking it into mono green heavy fields, as Karn is still a struggle, but you can steal a lot of games, and on your best draws you can beat any deck in the format. Next up, we have Blue Red Phoenix, which maintains its spot as a top contender by beating up mono green, but the continued evolution of Rakdos Midrange is showing that even though Phoenix has adapted to Shieldred by adding in more lightning axes, the deck still struggles to beat Red Black Midrange, and since Red Black is the most prevalent deck at the top tables, that does make for a difficult time. Last up, we have Red Green Bushwhacker, a deck that got a big upgrade in Carplusian Forest, as well as Phoenix Chick from Dominaria United. This is a deck that came in 2nd place with Ivan Gosaim's build. Obviously, we've played this deck on stream and it's looked great. It's been putting up more and more challenge results as people are moving away from mono red and onto Bushwhacker. It has a great mono green devotion matchup and can beat up most of the other control decks, while you do tend to struggle into mono white humans and have a close matchup into Rakdos. Skilled pilots are able to navigate it into a reasonable position, but but it is still a difficult matchup, and playing it too many times will lead to an event like what happened in the finals of the challenge, where Sam was unable to defeat Misplaced Ginger. Overall, the deck has been very impressive, and I expect we will see it hang around on the tier list for weeks to come. So there you have it. That's this week's update. It's the first update since Dominaria United came out. We've built up a little bit of data, and hopefully we're going to use that data of the first 3-4 weeks of Pioneer challenges and NRG events and things like that to help you win your Season 2 RCQs and prepare for your regional championships upcoming in November. So with that, thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.